Hey guys, Shalana here. Welcome to the Bin Zone. On today's video, we're talking about the latest Netflix original series, Hellbound. Now, if you haven't seen Hellbound, full spoilers ahead, you have been warned. So let's dive into the story. Hellbound is the story of this ethereal creature being that comes out of nowhere to random individuals and prophesizes their death. Not just their death, but the exact moment and time they're going to die and condemns their soul to hell. Once this being has done that, it vanishes, and when the time of death comes, a rumbling happens and these shadow creatures come out of nowhere, kind of like hellhounds, and they drag your soul to hell. It would have been one thing if they just took your soul and dragged you to hell, but before you go to hell, they viciously beat your ass. They beat the living shit out of you, and then they char your soul and leave your body as a husk of burning bone, essentially. So naturally, this causes a stir in the world, and now there's a new religion that spun from this called the New Truth. Now, the New Truth follows the doctrines of its chairman, Jinsu, who has been preaching for the past 10 years about this phenomenon in which he calls the ethereal-headed angel of the Lord that has condemned people to hell who have sinned, and these shadow creature demons are the hellhounds that drag your soul to hell because of the sins you've committed, and that's the message he's been spreading around. So the season as a whole is split into two parts, essentially. The first 3 episodes is the setting up of New Truth, and the second 3 episodes is in the world post New Truth. It kind of reminds me of the anime Death Note, when the first half of Death Note was setting up Kira and the legend of Kira, and the second half is set up years later in which the world has now adapted to Kira, but in this world it's adapted to New Truth. And they now have to live in a world where God is after you. If you sin, you're going straight to hell. So people are now behaving on their best behaviors or their worst behaviors. Because if we go back to the first half, where Chairman Jinsu spreading this, at the time, it was not a big revelation. This happens in the year 2022, which is a year from now. So it's not a big thing. People just think he's crazy. It's a conspiracy theory. They can't really quite put their name on the phenomenon per se because it just doesn't make sense. People don't actually even believe it's actually true and that the footage he has is CGI. So what the chairman is doing now, he's spreading the gospel of his religion, and he finds Mrs. Pack. Mrs. Pack has been condemned to die, and she tells him this, and he comes out of nowhere and offers her 3 billion won to live stream her death so the world can see and finally believing in him. While this is happening, we have Detective Ki Young who's on the case, because while this may be a supernatural thing, murders are still happening. So you have the police department on one end trying to find a scientific resolution to this, while the chairman himself is using his religious doctrine as a way to explain what's happening. And both parties come to head where the detective's daughter actually joins New Truth because 6 years before the story started, Detective Ki Young's wife was murdered by someone and he was sentenced to jail for 6 years, and now the guy's out. So it kind of left a sour taste in him and his daughter's mouth about the legal system of the world. And his daughter leans more onto God's retribution, which is fire and damnation to hell if you commit a sin. And Chairman Jinsu realizes that he can use her, so he ends up helping her enact her revenge by finding the guy who killed her mother. And they kill him, and they essentially make it look as though he was bound from hell because they essentially burn him up and leave his charred husk. So it looks eerily similar to how the shadow demon goons, and these guys really are goons because look at the mayhem they do. They just beat your ass when it comes. So they make it look as though it is the will of God that's happening. But Detective Ki Young soon finds out that his daughter and the chairman were the ones behind it. So after all this is happening, after he's at odds with the New Truth and he's trying to stop Mrs. Pack's live stream from happening, Mrs. Pack hires the lawyer Min. And Min is the one who sets up her estate to make sure her kids are okay. But she doesn't actually believe in the New Truth doctrine either because it's actually really bullshit if you think about it. But when the moment of truth comes, the news crews are here. Everyone's live streaming this, even on the internet, because we have this group called Arrowhead. Arrowhead is like the alt-right version of the New Truth. They believe in the doctrine, but they take it a step further, in which they don't wait for God's retribution. They actually go out and look for sinners, kill them themselves in order to enact God's vengeance. So it's a more radicalized version of the New Truth. All these people are converging on Mrs. Park's death day. And as that's happening, we have VIPs with masks, very important people in the world come to watch. And people are watching this in person and live streaming. And as it's happening, the shadow creatures appear. They beat the shit out of Mrs. Park and they char her soul and they leave her burning husk. Once that happens, everyone bows down and they believe in the New Truth. And when Detective Ki-young confronts Jing-soo about it at the end, Jing-soo admits that there was never any sign that it's from God. He actually made this whole thing up because 20 years ago, he was approached by the floating ethereal head that damned him to die in 20 years, and he tried to find meaning behind it. So when he couldn't find meaning behind it, he attributed the meaning of being a message of God. He's actually using this random act as a way for him to help the world by making humans more righteous and pious. That way, at least his death is not meaningless. So he created this whole farce in order to make it look like it's an act of God, when this is just a random supernatural occurrence. So now we're at the crux of the first 3 episodes where Detective Ki-young has him cornered, and he tells Ki-young, you can expose me now because I'm about to die in a few minutes. All you have to do is record me and show the world that I too have been damned by this, and they will essentially ban New Truth because the world actually believes Jing-soo is a pious man. So if he's damned for hell by these, they're all damned for hell. Or he tells Detective Ki-young, you can let the world believe in my lie and create a better world. But the option is, the caveat is, if you snitch on me, you also have to snitch on your daughter for killing your wife's murderer, essentially damning your own daughter to hell. And Detective Ki-young doesn't snitch. He lets the world believe in the message of Jin-soo and allows that to go over and blows over. And now we jump 4 years later. New Truth has become a whole entity, and now the world is in a post-New Truth world where New Truth essentially runs the government, runs everyone's lives, and people are too afraid to do anything because they're afraid of being damned to hell or sinning. But as this is happening, new sins are popping up, and every time someone dies, they've been condemned, their families are shamed because their parents or siblings or sons or whatever it may be is an actual sinner. So the entire family is stigmatized by this act. So there's a few individuals who don't want people to know that they've been damned by these creatures of hell. So they kind of keep it a secret. And that introduces us to the Sobo Group. And they're a group of people that make people who've been condemned disappear. So essentially no one ever finds out that they're condemned to hell. Therefore their families are safe. And it kind of takes away the power and mystique of New Truth. If they don't have enough people and they're not showing enough people dying of these sins, the world as a whole is not going to believe it's an act of God, because we as humans naturally revel in the chaos that is humanity and life. Order is the antithesis of human beings. So we need the freedom to be ourselves. So as this group is happening, New Truth and them are in a climactic kind of shadow war for the fate of the world, essentially. Which introduces us to our new main character of the second half, which is Young Jae. He's a TV producer who doesn't believe in the New Truth doctrine, and he hates the fact that New Truth is manipulating the news, manipulating everything, but he wants to be able to freely express the news and everything the way it is. He's the true essence of a reporter, essentially. But then what ends up happening is his baby, who was only a few hours old, the ethereal angel head shows up and condemns the baby to die, which completely disillusions him to the New Truth's doctrine, because a baby that's a couple of hours old cannot have committed a sin. And that is the crux plot of the second half, is if this news were to get out that this baby is condemned to die, babies can't sin, it topples New Truth's entire ideology, and the whole world will no longer follow their doctrine, because a baby cannot be a sinner because a baby's just a baby. Now we have a race between New Truth and Sobo. Whoever can get the baby first will win, because New Truth will get the baby, allow it to die quietly, and no one will ever hear about it, never questioning the fact that their religion is a farce. They don't actually preach the methodology of original sin. So it's not that we're all born with sin, it's the fact that humans can sin. So if we choose not to sin, we'll be spared of God's judgment. But Sobo wants to show the world this is a false religion, because a baby cannot sin. So if I take this little baby and bring it to you, and this baby's damned to hell, we have a problem here. This religion and this God they're following is not a righteous and virtuous God for killing this newborn unsinned baby. But then you have Young Jae's wife, who's confused and takes the baby to New Truth, and now lawyer Min, who's the leader behind Sobo, is actually helping Young Jae free her child. As the series goes on, we see how far they're willing to go to lie about their religion, and how people are willing to interpret things their own way, and they want to be pious, but that's in direct opposition to the God they claim to serve, because the Bible itself has something that advises against this rationality, and that is Proverbs 3 verse 5 through 6, where it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. So essentially, don't interpret his things, don't lean on your own understanding, but everyone in the show is leaning on their own understanding of the phenomenon to make it make sense, and they're going against the very God that they claim to follow. So towards the end of the series, New Truth is exposed because the baby is live streamed, and instead of the baby going to hell, the parents, young Jay and his wife, sacrificed themselves in order to protect the baby. And that completely exposes New Truth, because even while this is happening, New Truth wants to cover it up so bad they start beating up civilians and harassing the general populace. And it's all broadcast and it's sent throughout the world. So it kind of crumbles the religious fabric that New Truth is actually built upon, which we would think would be the end of the series. But at the end, the very end of the series, something amazing happens. The husk of Mrs. Pac comes back to life 4 years after they crushed her soul. And it seems as though all the victims of the Shadow, Hellbound, Hellhound, Shadow Goons are actually coming back to life, which leaves an even bigger question to be followed. Where did they go? 1, and 2, if they're not damned to hell, like what is happening and what is this ethereal head? I believe the ethereal head is the life force of the previous victims of the Shadow Goons. Because if you think about it, the Shadow Goons show up and tell someone you have this amount of time before you die, and then they die. So what if it's a way to keep replenishing the souls of people, and it's a cycle of the next husk is the one who becomes the Shadow Queen? But it leaves even bigger things to happen, because Chairman Jing-Su got his soul charred, but now that they're coming back to life, he's going to come in a world in which he is deified as a messiah because he founded the New Truth. And because he was not the leader of it, they could spin it as though the new leader, the new chairman of New Truth, has bastardized his religion, but he is the true messiah and he will lead the world to its new path, which is an interesting take, because we know people and religions are demonized, bastardized because of leadership. So what happens when the original Messiah comes back and he now has to usher in a new world? What happens when this baby, who could also be looked as a Messiah because the baby was able to survive the shadow creatures, what will that do for the world? These are all crazy questions that will be answered in the second season of Hellbound. But anyway, guys, that's my thoughts on Hellbound. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comment section below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and until next time, binge on.